Welcome back to our fifth and final session on Gems of Divine Mysteries. We ended last week, I believe, at paragraph 83, if I recall correctly, which was the end of a long digression in the middle of the City of Divine Unity. A digression which really is, in the scheme of things, not really a digression, because Baha'u'llah is in this in this bunch of paragraphs elucidating on the meaning of the true meaning of or symbolic interpretation of divine scriptures that allows one to go underneath the apparent differences or the apparent contradictions, the apparent non-fulfillment, and to see an underlying unity behind it. And he returns to the City of Divine Unity in paragraph 84 without ado, and he continues describing the state of the wayfarer in this city. It's quite a beautiful paragraph, so we'll read this paragraph because it includes a version of the Golden Rule. There are many different versions of the Golden Rule in Baha'u'llah's writings, so one version of it is here in paragraph 84. It says, "Know thou moreover that in this most hallowed and resplendent city thou shalt find the wayfarer to be lowly before all men and humble before all things. For naught doth he behold, save that he perceiveth God therein. He beholdeth the effulgent glories of God in the lights of his revelation that have encompassed the Sinai of creation. In this station the wayfarer must not claim the seat of honor in any gathering or walk before others in the desire to vaunt and exalt himself. Rather must he regard himself as standing at all times in the presence of his Lord. He must not wish for anyone that which he doth not wish for himself, nor speak that which he would not bear to hear spoken by another, nor yet desire for any soul that which he would not have desired for himself. It befitteth him rather to walk upon the earth with undeviating steps in the kingdom of his new creation." The first half of this paragraph in particular reminds me of the Baha'u'llah's description of the Valley of Unity in the Seven Valleys, about beholding nothing save that he perceiveth God therein. So this is a sort of one paragraph return to the City of Unity, and then he skips forward all the way to the beginning by describing more about the City of Search. So it might be a little confusing if you don't realize that sort of what's happening. There's a digression. He comes back to the City of Unity, and then in the next paragraph, he comes back to the City of Search as a way of contrasting what the seeker sees in that initial valley. He sees the differences, sees the contradictions, sees what Baha'u'llah refers to over and over as the law of change and transformation. So it's effective in that valley, and it's true, and you can't deny that it's true. But it's contrasted with the way that the seeker sees the world once they reach the Valley of Unity, where all of those differences become sort of transparent to the underlying unity underneath it. So he says, "Know, however, that the seeker at the outset of his journey witnesseth change and transformation, as hath already been mentioned. This is undoubtedly the truth, as hath been revealed concerning those days, on the day when the earth shall be changed into another earth," which is a quote from the Quran. "These are indeed the days, the like of which no mortal eye hath ever seen. Blessed is he that hath attained thereunto and realized their full worth. We had sent Moses with our sign, saying unto him, Bring forth thy people from darkness into light, and remind them of the days of God. And these are in truth the days of God, could ye but know it." So also I think there's a little bit of a subtext of Baha'u'llah hinting at his own approaching declaration as we go through this. So in the next couple of paragraphs are, I think, a couple of sort of further underlining of this key point about how Baha'u'llah is solving this problem of the diversity of religions by focusing on the underlying unity, but not at the expense of acknowledging the truth of the differences. And so it's not a kind of naive rejection of what everyone can see, but it's a sort of, this is true, that from the perspective of this valley, the law of change and transformation, as he calls it, is a truth. He says, in this station, all changing and varying realities are manifest before thee. Whoever denieth this truth hath verily turned aside from the cause of God, rebelled against his rule, and gainsaid his sovereignty. So in the strongest possible terms, he's saying, yes, it's true that there are these differences. For it is indeed within the power of him who changeth the earth into another earth, to transform all that dwell and move thereon. Wherefore marvel not at how he turneth darkness into light, light into darkness, ignorance into knowledge, error into guidance, death into life, and life into death. It is in this station, i.e. the valley of search, that the law of transformation taketh effect. Ponder thereon, if thou be of them that tread this path, that all thou didst ask of this lowly one may be made plain unto thee, and that thou mayest abide within the tabernacle of this guidance. For he doeth whatsoever he willeth, and ordaineth whatsoever he pleaseth. Nor shall he be asked of his doings, whilst all men will be asked of their every deed. And then he really puts, I think, a beautiful exclamation point on this principle in the next paragraph. For me, one of the key paragraphs of this book. He says, O my brother, in this stage, which marketh the beginning of the journey, thou shalt behold diverse stations and differing signs, even as was mentioned in connection with the city of search. All these hold true in their respective planes. It behooveth thine eminence in this station to consider each created thing in its own place, neither abasing nor exalting its true rank. For instance, if thou wert to reduce the unseen world to the realm of creation, this would be an act of sheer blasphemy, and the converse would likewise be the essence of impiety. Wert thou, however, to describe the unseen world and the realm of creation within their own stations, this would be the undoubted truth. In other words, wert thou to witness any transformation in the realm of the divine unity, no greater sin could be conceived in all creation. But wert thou to consider transformation in its own place and understand it accordingly, no harm could befall thee. So such a clear expression of the principle of the relativity of religious truth, as Shoghi Effendi puts it.
And understand, like I had in my notes that the importance of defining transformation within its own terms.
Yes.
Like it transformation is happening if you're looking at it from this place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You might not look at it from other places.
Mm-hmm. And this is how he makes space for diversity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He's at no point is he saying there's one correct way to look at this. He's like, that's never his modus operandi. He always takes even the most fundamental questions and will always say, we'll always find some way of acknowledging the opposite. You know, as Niels Bohr says, you know, the opposite of profound truths are other profound truths. And that seems to be the case with these spiritual concepts as well.
And it doesn't open the door for judgment. You can't judge.
There's no space for that.
Transformation has occurred. It just hasn't from your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he goes on. We won't read every single paragraph. I don't think we have time this evening. But he goes on sort of in this theme in paragraph 90, again saying to consider everything in its own place. Comprehend in like manner every station, sign, and illusion, that thou mayest perceive all things in their own place and consider all matters in their proper light. Mm-hmm. For in the station, the city of divine unity, are to be found those who have entered within the ark of divine guidance and journeyed through the heights of divine unity. Thou shalt behold the lights of beauty upon their faces and the mysteries of glory in their human temples. Thou shalt perceive the musk-laden fragrance of their words and behold the signs of his sovereignty in all their ways and doings. And then he takes a bit of an excursion to mention a point that was with which people would, during this time, object to the claims of Baha'u'llah's forerunner, the Bab, who at times seemed to have claimed different stations for himself. You know, the Bab in 1844, you know, minutes after Samuel Morse's message, telegraph message, you know, what hath God wrought, it makes a claim for himself, which initially sounds like a claim to be the return of the 12th Imam, a claim very much situated within the messianic expectations of Twelver Shi'ism. But that claim, through the course of the Bab's 6-year ministry, in the eyes of some, changed, maybe opportunistically as the Bab got more followers, but viewed through the lens of unity, as Baha'u'llah mentions here, that whether he claims a kind of prophetic station within the context of Twelver Shi'ism, or whether he claims something far more universal, as a return of, or a reincarnation of the Logos, which is first manifested in Adam and in Moses and Jesus and the other prophets. Either of those expressions are equally true. It's just a matter of how he may describe it to a different audience according to their capacity at different times. So Baha'u'llah addresses this kind of obliquely in paragraph 91, where he says, "Know then that all thou hast heard and witnessed, that day star of truth, the primal point, ascribed to himself of the designations of former times, like I am the return of the 12th Imam, for example, is only on account of the weakness of men and the scheme of the world of creation." It's an interesting phrase. "Otherwise, all names and attributes revolve around his essence and circle around the threshold of his sanctuary. For he it is who traineth all names, revealeth all attributes, conferreth life upon all things, proclaimeth the divine verses, and arrayeth the heavenly signs." Similarly, Baha'u'llah makes this point in the Kitab-i-Gan, that whether you consider Muhammad as the first prophet or the last prophet, he says it's almost immaterial. And there are those who focus on a verse of the Quran and derive from that the conclusion that Muhammad is the last prophet, and so therefore there can't be any further divine guidance to humanity after Islam. And Baha'u'llah has to argue that, well, yes, he is the last prophet. He can't say the Quran was wrong, but he says he's the last prophet, but he's also the first prophet, and everything in between, and every prophet can make that claim. So it's a way of kind of relativizing these claims as related to the context of time and place. Baha'u'llah, I think, maybe referring a bit to his forthcoming proclamation of his own mission in paragraph 92, where he says this is still a secret. So some of what he's saying, he sort of says, these are secrets that I'm just telling you, until the right time. He says, "Know, moreover, that all that we have mentioned concerning these journeys is intended for naught but the elect among the righteous. And shouldst thou spur on the charger of the Spirit and traverse the meads of heaven, thou wouldst complete all these journeys and discover every mystery in less than the twinkling of an eye." Of course, it's clear in the sort of larger context that there are no secret teachings in Baha'u'llah's message. And there are secrets, but these secrets are open secrets. Just like the parables of Jesus were open secrets. He would tell it, and then he would say, "He that hath an ear, let him hear." So here are the words, but if you really want to get at the meaning, there's a step that has to be taken to understand the meaning of it. So it becomes a kind of open secret. And I think that's similar when Baha'u'llah refers to secrets. I think it's in a similar sort of a vein. Yeah. There aren't certain tablets which were only meant to be read by certain people and not by others, for example. So he concludes this long trip through the Valley of Unity, and then comes, as in the Seven Valleys, to the Valley of Wonderment. Actually, not as in the Seven Valleys. In the Seven Valleys, the Valley of Unity is followed by the Valley of Contentment, which is skipped here. He goes straight to the valley, to the Garden of Wonderment, he says. And the word for wonderment is interesting. The word is Hayrat, and it's the same word that's in the Seven Valleys. And it's interesting because wonderment is just one of a few ways of translating that word, and it was chosen to be translated as wonderment, I think, more as an homage to the original translation of the Seven Valleys. because it also means something more in the direction of bewilderment, or even confusion, or even kind of, there's wonderment, I think, conveys an idea of awe in a more positive sense, whereas bewilderment and confusion is more in the direction of my foundation has just been pulled away and I don't know which way is up anymore, and it can be confusing or even terrifying. And in that sense, I think that other way of understanding Heirat or wonderment comes through here as it does also a little bit in the Seven Valleys. Almost as though one in the Valley of Wonderment is now standing at the precipice of an abyss. And that abyss that one is standing at the precipice of and realizes sort of for the first time that one is faced with the abyss and one has to jump into the abyss. That abyss is the abyss of what comes next, which is annihilation. Translated in the Seven Valleys as true poverty and absolute nothingness, which I think partly accounts for the bewilderment of the seeker who, having reached the Valley of Unity, thinking, I've made it, I've attained, I've seen the oneness behind all things. And then there's a valley in which they realize, the journey is not over, but the hardest step is still ahead. And the hardest step is the step of the complete letting go of self, the complete self-annihilation, which if you just read the Seven Valleys of Baha'u'llah, you'd think that's the end of the mystic journey because that's the seventh valley. But in Gems of Divine Mysteries, fortunately, we have a long description of the valley subsequent to the valley of annihilation, which Baha'u'llah describes as the valley of immortality, which sounds like a big relief because, it's not annihilation at the end of the mystic journey, but it's really immortality, just like we thought it was. But as we'll see, the immortality is not the immortality we thought it was either. It's not just a return of the same seeker back to the original condition. On the other side of self-annihilation is what Baha'u'llah calls baqa fillah. It's immortality or subsistence in God, which is different from the one's subsistence in oneself, which was how one identified prior to that station of annihilation.
I think of it like the drop becoming part of the ocean.
It's the drop reuniting with the ocean, and nothing is annihilated in the end, but what is annihilated are the boundaries of the drop. Or another imagery in the Baha'i writings is the imagery of the reed from which the pith of self has to be blown out in order for it to sound the melodies that it's capable of sounding. But that pith of self, that has to be gotten rid of, and that's the valley of annihilation, is the getting rid of the pith of self. And on the other side is something much better for the reed than its prior state. But it's not the same as the state came before.
Something I noticed in 95, in this the voice sort of changes. Because in other ones, it talks about how the wayfarer. But in this one, it's Baha'u'llah who's confused the whole time.
He refers to wonderment and then he immediately switches it to his own
self.
He says, if you understood what's really going on here, then you would enter this valley.
So you almost wonder, so am I going to enter this valley, or do I get to skip this?
This is just what he's experiencing.
It doesn't say the wayfarer would experience it. He talks about himself experiencing it.
Yes, he opens up saying the wayfarer experiences it, but then
he shifts only to talk about his experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. And in those first two paragraphs of the Garden of Wonderment, it's a digression on his own sufferings, but then it returns to the seeker in paragraph 97 or 98.
So do all manifestations know that they're going to what their suffering is going to be? Because even Christ did the exact same thing where he said, God, if I don't have to do this, I'm paraphrasing him, then please let the cup pass me. And he didn't. And so he was just and then when he was with Judas outside, he's like, Judas, I love you. Right before Judas, faced him on the cheek. But, how do they know that?
Yeah.
I know how they know.
Did he know?
It's just, it's intense to have to go through that and to know what the outcome is.
Yeah.
I've also heard that that's also one of the signs that they are who they say they are. is that willingness to suffer.
So it's in that sense, it's a very kind of Christ-like passage that comes here in paragraph 95. He said, "Were I to disclose unto thee the reality of this station, thou wouldst lament and bewail the plight of this servant who remaineth in the hands of these infidels, who have grown perplexed at his plight and is lost in bewilderment in this fathomless ocean. They conspire each day to put me to death, and seek at every hour to banish me from this land, even as they banished me from another land. Yet this servant standeth ready before them, awaiting whatsoever the Almighty hath ordained and decreed for us. Nor do I fear any soul, encompassed as we may be by such trials and tribulations as are inflicted by the wicked and the malicious, and surrounded at this hour by myriad woes and sorrows. Noah's flood is but the measure of the tears I have shed, and Abraham's fire an ebullition of my soul. Jacob's grief is but a reflection of my sorrows, and Job's afflictions a fraction of my calamity."
But the significance of the "my" being capitalized every time. So when you're part of the translations, how do you know what letters to capitalize that indicate the significance?
So the practice since the time of Shoghi Effendi is to capitalize all pronouns that relate to either the middle tier or the top tier of the three-tiered Baha'i cosmology of God, prophet, and creation. So any pronouns relating either to the prophet, the logos, or to God are all uppercased. And so that's why there's so many uppercase pronouns. There actually is there's an errata in my version, I don't know if it was corrected in your versions, where it says, "Who hath grown perplexed at his plight, and is lost in bewilderment in this fathomless ocean." In the original, the his was lowercase, and it should be uppercase for consistency with all the others. But that might have been corrected already in the versions you have. This is like a first printing, so. But that's
What is the divan? Divan?
Divan is a work of Rumi's, I think. The Divan of Rumi, I believe. It's Rumi was a very prolific poet. I'm sorry, Divan of Ibn Fares. I think Rumi might have also had one, but there are so many mystic poets you can lose track of them. But it's one of many famous mystical poems in the Persian tradition. So he says, "Were I to recount unto thine eminence the dire adversities that have befallen me, thou wouldst be so grieved as to forsake the mention of all things, and to forget thyself, and all that the Lord hath created on earth. But as this is not our wish, I have concealed the revelation of the divine decree in the heart of Baha, and veiled it from the eyes of all that move in the realm of creation, that it may lay hid within the tabernacle of the unseen, until such time as God will have revealed its secret." In retrospect, with 2020 hindsight, what a very obvious allusion to Baha'u'llah's approaching declaration. But he mentions that this is a digression from the theme of wonderment. He says, "As we have digressed from our theme, let us leave aside these allusions and return to our discussion of this city. Verily, whoso entereth therein shall be saved, and whoso turneth aside therefrom will assuredly perish. O thou who art mentioned in these tablets, know thou that he who embarketh upon this journey will marvel at the signs of the power of God and the wondrous evidences of his handiwork. Bewilderment will seize him from every side, even as hath been attested by that essence of immortality from the concourse on high." So now we've moved from wonderment to bewilderment. "Increase my wonder and amazement at thee, O God. Well hath it been said, I knew not what amazement was until I made thy love my cause. Oh, how amazing would it be if I were not amazed by thee."
Okay, so translation point. How did you make it rhyme when it came from another language? Yeah.
great difficulty.
Yeah. Because it works.
And metered, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it actually says what the original says. Yeah. In this valley, the wayfarers stray and perish ere they attain their final abode. So that's the kind of the at the extreme end of this wonderment. That wonderment leads to an actual kind of straying and perishing, which is something that might happen as one approaches that sort of abyss of nothingness that comes next. It says, "Gracious God, so immense is this valley, so vast this city in the kingdom of creation, that it seemeth to have neither beginning nor end. How great the blessedness of him who completeth this journey therein, and who traverseth through the assistance of God the hallowed soul of this heavenly city, the city in which the favored ones of God and the pure in heart are overcome with wonder and awe. And we say, praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds." So now we move to the city of absolute nothingness, which we've already introduced.
What's the significance of the Lord of the worlds? Like every time I read this, it's in the long obligatory prayer as well.
Yeah.
Lord of the worlds. So like, what does that mean?
The Lord of the worlds, Rabbul Alameen, is a phrase that occurs in the opening sentence of the Quran, and so it's quite often heard as a reference to God. The opening surah of the Quran, actually, it's just very short, but it's very beautiful. If you want to hear, I could chant it for you. It goes, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim, Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim, Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. So it starts off by saying, praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds, the merciful, the compassionate. Thee do we worship, unto thee do we turn for aid. And then a brief, I should read the translation to do a better job, but guide us into the straight path, the path which thou hast laid out for us, not the path of those whom thou hast, towards whom thou art wrathful. So there's an idea of God's mercy, but also of God's wrath, of invocation. It's a beautiful prayer, which is endlessly recited by the mystics, endlessly parsed, down to the letter, down to the word. So this phrase "Lord of the worlds" then is just kind of ground zero of the Quranic revelation. And well, what are the worlds? Are these like literal worlds? You can interpret it in in different ways. There's an interesting tablet of Abdu'l-Baha where he's not interpreting Lord of the Worlds, but he's interpreting a similar phrase in the Quran where it says, God is the creator of the heavens and the earth and that which lieth between them. And Abdu'l-Baha says that between them refers to all the worlds, the physical worlds, which are also peopled by beings, capable of knowing and worshiping God. And so one way of reading out this idea of multiplicity is in a physical sense. It's a vast cosmos. Why would life only exist on this planet? Especially if the purpose of existence in some way is attainment of consciousness, and particularly attainment of consciousness of one's own origin point, which we can say is attainment to the knowledge of God, if we want to use the theological language. And that's one way of reading out things like Lord of the Worlds. But another way of reading it out is that these worlds are spiritual worlds, which are worlds of consciousness, a potentially infinite number of which exist on this very planet. The worlds of the mineral and of plants and animals and so forth are all their own worlds of consciousness in their own sense. Worlds in which, to each degree, according to its capacity, is reflective of and yearning towards reunion. And within the human realm, there are so many different worlds, and among them are these different cities in Gems of the Divine Mysteries and the valleys of the seven valleys. Each one is each station of the seeker is a kind of world in itself. It's its own self-consistent way of looking at the world, which some people inhabit their whole lives, and others traverse, between one city and the next. And I think part of Baha'u'llah's genius is realizing that is a reality of the human condition, that we're all traversing these worlds, that there's an origin point and an end point, which is the same, that some people are in their journey, stay for prolonged periods in certain valleys, and the view from certain valleys is incompatible with the view from other valleys. But Baha'u'llah is validating all of these valleys, which is the only way that humanity can ultimately reach true unity, which is not an imposed kind of unity and uniformity where everyone believes the same thing, but a true organic unity, which arises from the natural differentiation in the human race and between human minds and souls in different ways of looking at the world. So in that sense, the Lord of the Worlds then is the Lord of those realms of consciousness which are uncounted.
Maybe think of the tablet of all food.
Yes, the tablet of all food is an early commentary by Baha'u'llah on another verse of the Quran, in which he also divides up the sort of reality into different worlds and describes what happens in each world. And there he seems to be following a division which has some precedent in mystical literature of Nasut, Jabarut, Malakut, Lahut. Is not unique to the Baha'i writings. So now we're in the city of absolute nothingness in paragraph 101, and for the next few paragraphs we're there. But then he moves on and spends more time in the valley that follows. But what he says about nothingness, and this is I think an important point to understand also about the seven valleys, because the seven valleys seems to end on the valley of absolute nothingness. But in the seven valleys, as here, the two are kind of, depending on how he describes it, the two are sometimes described as almost like two sides of the same coin, and sometimes they're described as two separate stages. So he does both here in Gems of the Divine Mysteries. In paragraph 101, he says, "And should the servant ascend to even loftier heights, quit this mortal world of dust, and seek to ascend unto the heaven celestial abode, he will then pass from this city into the city of absolute nothingness, that is, of dying to self and living in God." So that's a joining of the dying to self with the living in God, which he goes on and describes in the city of immortality. That's the living in God piece. And so just depending on how he describes it, they're almost simultaneous processes. One dies to self and simultaneously attains life in God. But conceptually, one can break it out into two separate stages, even if the two kind of happen at the same moment. So he's focusing on the dying to self piece of that in the next few paragraphs. He says, "In this station, this most exalted habitation, this journey of utter self-effacement, the wayfarer forgetteth his soul, spirit, body, and very being, immerseth himself in the sea of nothingness, and liveth on earth as one unworthy of mention, nor will one find any sign of his existence, for he hath vanished from the realm of the visible and attained into the heights of self-abnegation." How can the true lover continue to exist when once the effulgent glories of the beloved are revealed? How can the shadow endure when once the sun hath shone forth? How can a devoted heart have any being before the existence of the object of its devotion? Nay, by the one in whose hand is my soul, in this station the seeker's complete surrender and utter effacement before his Creator will be such that were he to search the east and the west and traverse land, sea, mountain, and plain, he would find no trace of his own self or of any other soul. And then following a paragraph, another sort of paragraph with a bit of a veiled declaration of his of what is to come. He then moves to the city of immortality on paragraph 105. From this most exalted station, from this most sublime and glorious plain, the seeker entereth the city of immortality, therein to abide forever. In this station he beholdeth himself established upon the throne of independence and the seat of exaltation. There will he comprehend the meaning of that which hath been revealed of old, concerning the day whereon God shall enrich all through his abundance. Well is it with them that have attained unto this station, and drunk their fill from this snow-white chalice before this crimson pillar. Having in this journey immersed himself in the ocean of immortality, rid his heart from attachment to aught save him, and attained unto the loftiest heights of everlasting life, the seeker will see no annihilation, either for himself or for any other soul. He will quaff from the cup of immortality, tread in its land, soar in its atmosphere, consort with them that are its embodiments, partake of the imperishable and incorruptible fruits of the tree of eternity, and be forever accounted in the lofty heights of immortality amongst the denizens of the everlasting realm. So I'll note, just as it doesn't seem, it's not the way I've described. I've described it as, the other side of annihilation is immortality in God. With the idea that it can't be the same person on the other side, but it's that sort of, it's the hollowed out reed. The language that Baha'u'llah uses in describing immortality, you could read it that way, or you could read it as, well, this is the same seeker as before. He doesn't make a strong point about it, and I'm not sure why that is. I'll leave that as an open question. Maybe my interpretation of this is off. Maybe Baha'u'llah is describing in these words as a kind of mercy to those who might otherwise find it too challenging.
Like scaring them off kind of thing.
Scaring them off. In the Seven Valleys, he talks about reaching, right around in these valleys. He says if he were to whisper one word of what he knew, then they would hang him by the gallows. There's a sense of danger almost of like not able to say too much, and so it's cloaked in words that will in some way hide the challenging nature of it from those who aren't ready.
Could I just ask this notion of immortality is, I keep coming back to that hidden word where, behold me standing in you. At some level, is he trying to intimate that there is a continuity of who we are in God as we were before even we were created? Then we were created, and there's some accretion of something that is self that is on that, but then when that is gone, there still is something that was there, that was foreknown by God, and that we're coming back to that. And so it's definitely true that we're getting into a new life in God, but that's the life that already started in God.
The first Arabic hidden word, possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. So that's also describing that sort of immortality in God, it seems to me. And it's through possessing a pure, kindly, and radiant heart. It's not through like becoming utterly self-abnegating. Well, maybe it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Having a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, entails that degree of self-abnegation.
That can also mean differently for per person, right?
Right.
So like maybe I have like an extreme amount of ego, and therefore I need to rid myself of that ego, versus someone who is very kind and too generous and maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
And thine is not capitalized, is it?
It's not capitalized in the first Arabic hidden word.
No, it's
That's
not.
an amazing thing,
Yeah.
actually, when you think about it.
It's like, yeah, there's just so much to ponder about that first hidden word, and then a few more hidden words in where he says, with the hands of power I made thee, and within thee have I placed the essence of my life. So it's all very ambiguous. And I think it's a calculated ambiguity as to what are we really, it's what's our true reality. Yeah, it's the divine spark in some way, Baha'u'llah says. In another way, it's us, truly us, but when our hearts are purified, then that's, I think, one of those sort of mysteries of the mystics, of the nature of the soul. Is it really ours, or is it not ours? The Bab also put this in a very challenging way in one of his commentaries on the tradition of truth, where he talks about God's self-remembrance in very cosmic terms. God has to remember himself to himself. This self-remembrance of God is the origin point of creation in a way. God loves his own essence, and from this love of God for his own essence, everything else comes into being. And the Bab in this commentary says the human soul, he says in passing, he refers to this divine remembrance, he says, which some have referred to as the soul. And he goes on, and almost in literally in like a parenthetical commentary off of describing the divine self-remembrance, he sort of includes, oh, by the way, that's the soul. That's what we think of as the soul, like the human soul. It's a mode of the divine self-remembrance. So, at least in this passage, the Bab is very challengingly associating our true reality with something which we might not logically think is us. I think, oh, that's God doing his thing that brings creation to being.
Right.
And the Bab's saying, no, that's you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are that. Thou art that. That's what the ancient. That's what the
Yeah.
Hindus say. That Joseph Campbell loved to quote that.
Yeah.
Thou art that.
Yeah.
It's one of the deepest things you could say. God is saying, what are we? It's that same ambiguity in the Upanishads that Baha'u'llah is saying here in the words, or that Moses, that God says to Moses.
Yeah.
When Moses says, what should I tell them? And God says to Moses,
I am
he
that
says,
I
am. He says, tell them I am sent you.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? It's like God is like identifying himself with being itself in a way. And so that ambiguity is present in, in each of the all the great sort of religious traditions have this strange kind of mystical identity of the divine with the individual.
We are stardust.
We're stardust.
Not just
And at the same
not just
time,
physically.
we're lowly dust. Yeah.
And I just add one more thing. The notion of immortality, I mean, it's a word, so,
That we can't
Try-
fathom.
Yeah. Trying to break it apart like some logical piece is silly, but the notion that immortality, there is a sense of continuity. That
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
almost as if continuity is more the point
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
than being undying.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Ever
so
Yeah.
so that one who I was, that God knew before I was,
has always
is
been.
never not going to be there.
And has
Mhm.
always been.
And that maybe is the immortality on the other side, because it's not some living person who is now, with the pith of self removed. That person is still there because God is never not going to be God in the way he has formed us, each
Mhm.
one. So
Yes.
I guess the word continuity means a lot more
Yeah.
to me than
that's
immortality.
our
Yeah.
heart's desire.
But the
Yeah.
way you described it for me has finally made me understand why Hinduism, like why they believe in reincarnation.
Uh-huh.
I never could understand it, but now I'm starting to understand the analogy. We are
Yeah.
always continuing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
not
Makes
always. I mean,
total
my
sense.
brain-
no,
Total
I
sense.
for a long
Yeah.
time,
I've
I
been
believed that.
pondering on that
Mhm.
forever, but I can never understand that one regard. And now I'm starting to realize it's about continuity. It's about
Yeah.
the fact that we have always been, will always be,
Yeah.
and we will continue to be in that.
Yeah.
That's
I've always thought
Yeah.
of reincarnation as a metaphor.
Yeah,
just as Christianity has all of those.
Right.
Resurrection,
but I just couldn't understand
reincarnation,
what
Yeah.
that was.
they all mean the same
Yeah.
thing to me, which is renewal of spirit
Yeah.
and how it carries forward. That's what it's always.
Yeah. That continuity of immortality, I think, was what we also touched on either last week or the week before, where Baha'u'llah's talking, spends a long time talking about what's the real meaning of life and death.
Yeah.
It says, true life is something that is attained in this life.
Yes.
It's that life of faith.
Yes.
That's the meaning of life, and the real meaning of immortality at the same time is that life of faith. It really has nothing to do with the physical moment of death. We assign such significance to that physical moment of death, and Baha'u'llah is trying to sort of erase the significance of that, saying no, it's far more continuous than that. That's a discontinuous moment in the physical realm, but the actual continuity is this point about spiritual life being something that we live in and attain.
Yeah, and
now.
in reincarnation, we want to attribute the continuity to material form.
Right, I will come back as a grasshopper.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not, but I think I always got hung up on that physical aspect of it. I never thought of it from an outside point of view, which is like the continuity of it. Now that makes sense to me, why they believe it. It's just their interpretation.
Yeah. So Baha'u'llah, towards the end of this, is like saying, "Look, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to bring things to a close." As are we.
There's one place where he's like, the
secret
messenger
was impatient. Yeah.
Dang that messenger!
Oh yeah. This is where he says it.
Another 50 pages.
Why do we care about him? Right?
Yeah. So it's the end of paragraph 107. He says, "I shall, however, bring my theme to a close, since time is short and the inquirer impatient, and since these secrets are not to be openly divulged, save by leave of God the Almighty, the All-Compelling." And then another maybe sly reference to his own approaching declaration. And then in paragraph 109, this very grim warning to anyone who has any, who's starting to get any ideas about what their own attainments might be, having read this and saying, "Oh, I line up with this valley or that valley." Baha'u'llah warns us about that. He says, "No, moreover, this should one who hath attained unto these stations and embarked upon these journeys fall prey to pride and vainglory, he would at that very moment come to naught and return to the first step without realizing."
Like a trap door, I always think of that. That's so unfair. You go down the
Chutes and ladders.
It's like the-
That's really
it's like the-
unfair.
It's unfair, yeah.
Yeah.
But that
What if
definitely
I'm
keeps
like,
you
oh,
humble.
I'm in that journey.
Yeah.
Absolutely
There's
keeps you
that
humble.
great T.S. Eliot quote about returning to where you started, knowing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Maybe not knowing it for the first time, but returning to the story.
Yeah. So yeah, this definitely takes care of any temptation to like grade oneself or others or to rank. All this. All these tablets refer to stages, valleys, stages, and at the end he's like, just don't think in these terms. And he makes it even more clear. In just a few paragraphs, we'll get to the point where I think he puts a real exclamation point on that, and it's in the next valley actually, which is in a way a valley beyond valleys. But before, he's in paragraph 110, he also says something, I think, which speaks to me also of those Arabic hidden words about the divine light within. He says, "For were they to reach the ultimate object of their quest for God and their attainment unto him, they would have but reached that abode which hath been raised up within their own hearts. How then could they ever hope to ascend into such realms as have not been ordained for them or created for their station? Nay, though they journey from everlasting to everlasting, they will never attain unto him who is the midmost heart of existence and the axis of the entire creation. He on whose right hand flow the seas of grandeur, on whose left stream the rivers of might, and whose court none can ever hope to reach, how much less his very abode. For he dwelleth in the ark of fire, speedeth in the sphere of fire through the ocean of fire, and moveth within the atmosphere of fire. How can he who hath been fashioned of contrary elements ever enter or even approach this fire? Were he to do so, he would be instantly consumed." So it gives us the idea not only that the sort of uttermost end of the spiritual journey is the attainment to the divine light within. So it's not really us, it's the divine spark within. But also there's always something unattainable which keeps us humble as well. There's realms that we have no access to. They're made of contrary elements. We're never going to get to that point. And that's an important theological fulcrum that appears over and over in the Baha'i writings and is emphasized a lot, I think, also in Islam, which is this essential incommensurability between the realm of creation and the realm of God.
Right.
And it responds to what are said to be the great grave errors of some of the mystics who believed that they could become God, or that in some way they could identify with divinity itself, and also an implicit response to pantheistic notions of God being sort of entering into the world quite literally and being sort of the substance of all things, being God's substance. Both the Baha'i writings and Islam, as well as other traditions, but it's a very strong theme in the Baha'i writings, and I think partly to counteract any sort of trace of pride and vainglory on our part, to make sure that one is kept in one's spiritual place. Yes, in one sense you could talk about us being sparks of the divine and us participating in the divine creative event and in the way that the Bab talks about, for example, but to keep us humble, that realm of the inaccessible essence is truly inaccessible.
Well, I feel like Abdullah's discussions of the mineral world and the vegetable world, that kind of helps. It's like a rose, however perfect it may be, is never going to be a cat.
Yeah.
Right. And so the same is true for us. No matter. Right.
Yeah. In the Bible, it talks about like the table will never know the carpenter.
Yeah. The painter can never know the painting. The painting can never know the painter. Even though it's sort of intimately connected, carries something of the spirit of the painter, it's never going to understand the painter. So the seeker, he says in paragraph 112, reaches a station wherein that which hath been ordained for him knoweth no bounds. The fire of love so blazeth in his heart that it seizeth the reins of constraint from his grasp. At every moment his love for his Lord increaseth, and draweth him nearer to his Creator in such wise that if his Lord be in the east of nearness, and he dwell in the west of remoteness, and possess all that earth and heaven contain of rubies and gold, he would forsake it all and rush forth to the land of the desired one. And shouldst thou find him to be otherwise, know assuredly that such a man is a lying impostor. We verily all belong unto him whom God shall make manifest in the latter resurrection. This is Baha'u'llah's own. And through him shall be raised again to life. But in these days, inasmuch as we have lifted not the veils that conceal the countenance of the cause of God, not for a couple of years anyway, nor disclosed unto men the fruits of these stations which we have been forbidden to describe, thou beholdest them drunk with heedlessness. So it mentions again this sort of messianic secret that's being concealed. Before he passes to the last valley, which is valley number 9, I suppose, if we're counting in the same sequence as the 7 valleys. We're 2 valleys beyond annihilation now. But this valley is I think, really key, because it's the valley that breaks the category of valleys. It's like at some point you have to exit the loop. For the Hindus, how do you get out of the cycle of reincarnation? How do you break the chain? How do you sort of get outside it? And that's, I think, Baha'u'llah's equivalent to that is this city. He said, from this station the wayfarer ascendeth unto a city that hath no name or description, and whereof one heareth neither sound nor mention. Therein flow the oceans of eternity, whilst this city itself revolveth around the seat of eternity. Therein the sun of the unseen shineth resplendent above the horizon of the unseen, a sun that hath its own heavens and its own moons, which partake of its light, and which rise from and set upon the ocean of the unseen. Nor can I ever hope to impart even a dewdrop of that which hath been decreed therein, as none is acquainted with its mysteries save God, its creator and fashioner, and his manifestations. I wonder if this valley, which is kind of beyond name or description, beyond name or attribute, is what Baha'u'llah refers to in this alternative description of the mystical journey, which is a very short paragraph in one of his tablets, and this is a provisional translation. But he says it in the following terms. He says, know thou that between us capital Us, speaking from the voice of God, between us and the creatures there standeth a ladder with 3 steps. The first is described as the world and its vanities. The second as the hereafter and all that is ordained therein. And the third as the kingdom of names. Whoso is enabled to traverse these stations shall attain the presence of the Lord of names and attributes in less than a moment. Take heed, O people of Baha, lest ye tarry at these stations. Pass over them as swiftly as a passing cloud. So this description of the journey, so the first stage makes sense. You have to pass by the world and all that it contains. The next one is a little more challenging, the hereafter and all that it contains. He says you have to pass that by as well. Wow. In a way, that's whatever we think that is a limited conception. Mm-hmm. So we have to be able to ascend beyond that. And then the third step beyond that is the whole realm of names and attributes. So the whole this and that, the whole framework of language which divides things into me and you, the distinctions, the I and thou, the subject and object. All of that has to be transcended. Or even thinking about spiritual journey as a sequence of stages in time. Like at some point, all of this becomes dissolved into a kind of a oneness that doesn't admit of any distinction at all, that doesn't admit of any description at all. In my mind, I associate this with this city that hath no name or description. So Baha'u'llah now concludes. He says, know, moreover, that when we undertook to reveal these words and committed some of them to writing, it was our intention to elucidate for thine eminence in the sweet accents of the blessed and the well-favored of God all that we had previously mentioned of the words of the prophets and the sayings of the messengers. Time, however, was lacking, and the traveler who came from thy presence was in great haste and eager to return. Thus have we cut short our discourse and contented ourselves with this much, without completing the description of these stages in a seemly and befitting manner. Indeed, we have omitted the description of major cities and mighty journeys. Such was the haste of the courier that we even forsook the mention of the 2 exalted journeys of resignation and contentment. We know about contentment from the 7 valleys, but we haven't seen the valley of resignation described.
We never will.
And I guess we never will.
Just be resigned to it.
Be resigned. Yet should thine eminence reflect upon these brief statements, thou wouldst assuredly acquire every knowledge, attain unto the object of all learning, and exclaim, sufficient are these words unto all creation, both visible and invisible. Even so, should the fire of love burn within thy soul, thou wouldst ask, is there yet any more? And we say, praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds. Rabbul Alameen.